She said 3 words to a man she had known for 4 hours. 3 words that changed both their lives. Take me with you. Jesse Cole was saddling his horse to ride north when she said it. He was a man who had spent 11 years asking nothing of anyone and expecting nothing in return. He was also a man who had never, in those 11 years, left someone behind who needed help. He looked at her. She looked at him. He said 1 word. All right. What followed was 400 miles of Texas that neither of them expected. And at the end of it, a choice that would define the rest of Jesse Cole's life. Whether he made the right one depends on who you ask, and when. This channel tells the stories of the men and women who built the frontier with their choices, not their words. Subscribe now. You need to hear where this road leads. Texas, 1878. The border between Texas and Mexico was not a line on a map in those years. It was a conversation between two worlds that never quite agreed on the terms. Men crossed it going both directions for reasons they rarely explained. Commerce, debt, love, survival. The border didn't ask which one. Jesse Cole had been riding south for 3 weeks. Not for any particular reason that he'd have told a stranger. He was delivering a letter for a man in San Antonio to a man in Laredo. A letter that had been waiting for a rider willing to make the trip. Jesse needed the money. The job needed a man. That was the whole story. 38 years old, born in Tennessee. Came to Texas at 27 for reasons he'd stopped explaining because the reasons had stopped mattering. He'd worked cattle, fenced land, rode messenger routes along the border for 11 years. He was good at 2 things, getting where he needed to go and minding his own business. On the afternoon of October 3rd, 1878, one of those things was about to stop being possible. He delivered the letter at noon. The man in Laredo read it, nodded, gave Jesse an envelope with his payment, and closed the door. Enough for the ride back. Enough for a meal and a bed before he left. He put the money in his shirt pocket and went to find both. The meal was beans and salt pork that had been cooked too long. He ate it anyway. Outside the window, the main street of Laredo ran parallel to the river, 30 yards from the water that separated 2 countries. On that street, 2 worlds moved past each other in both directions all day long. Merchants, cowboys, vaqueros, soldiers, women with baskets on their heads, men leading mules piled with goods. Jesse was finishing the last of his coffee when the commotion started. Not a fight. Something quieter than that. 3 men moving through the crowd with a specific kind of purpose that parts crowds without asking. They were following someone. Jesse could tell because he'd seen men follow people before, and there was a particular way a man moves when he's tracking someone who doesn't know they're being tracked. He followed their eyes. A young woman, early 20s, dark hair under a plain rebozo, moving through the crowd with the contained urgency of someone who is trying very hard not to run. Jesse watched for 30 seconds, long enough to understand the basic geometry of the situation. 3 men following 1 woman who was trying not to be followed. He left his coffee unfinished. He came out on the side street and walked parallel to the main street, moving faster than the crowd. Got ahead of the woman. When she turned the corner, she nearly walked into him. She stopped. Her eyes went immediately from his face to over his shoulder, looking for the men behind her. Jesse spoke quietly, like they were 2 people who knew each other. "Walk with me," he said. "Don't look back." She hesitated for half a second. Then she did exactly what he said. They walked 3 blocks without speaking. Jesse kept his eyes moving without moving his head. The 3 men had lost them in the crowd at the corner. He stopped in the shadow of a building that stored feed and grain, turned to face her. "They're gone," he said. She looked carefully in all directions. Then she exhaled. She was younger than he thought from a distance. 20, maybe 22. The kind of face that had been carrying something heavy for longer than it should have. "Why did you help me?" she asked. Her English was careful and precise. Learned, not native. Jesse thought about it. 3 men following one woman usually means trouble for the woman, he said. That's a good enough reason. She seemed to accept that. Her name was Elena Reyes. She gave it the way people give their name when they've decided you've earned it. Her father had owned a small ranch south of the river, 15 miles into Coahuila. Had owned it until 6 months ago, when a man named Vargas had decided he wanted the land and the water rights that came with it. Vargas had the kind of power that didn't need to make arguments. It just needed to make problems disappear. Her father had become one of those problems. Elena did not say how. Jesse did not ask. She had crossed the river 3 days ago with everything she owned in a single bag. She had a cousin in San Antonio. She had never been to San Antonio. She had no money for the journey, and 3 of Vargas's men had apparently followed her across the border to make sure she didn't get there. Jesse processed this the way he processed most things, quietly, thoroughly, without letting his face show the work. Elena watched him think. "You're going north?" she asked. "Tomorrow morning," Jesse said. She looked at him. He looked at her. "Take me with you," she said. Jesse Cole had spent 11 years making decisions. Most of them were small. This one didn't feel small. He looked at her, at the bag she carried, at the direction the 3 men had gone. "All right," he said. They left Laredo before sunrise. Jesse had bought Elena a horse with part of his payment. Not a good horse. The best he could afford with what he had left. She mounted without difficulty. He noticed that. The way someone who has grown up around horses mounts a horse she's never ridden before. No hesitation. No adjustment. Just up and settled. They rode in silence for the first 2 hours. Not uncomfortable silence. The silence of 2 people who understand that they don't owe each other conversation just because they're traveling the same road. The land north of Laredo opened up the way Texas always opened up. No announcement. Just suddenly enormous. Sky bigger than you expected. Brush stretching further than you could follow. Elena looked at it without speaking. Jesse watched her look at it. "First time north of the river?" he asked. "First time this far," she said. She asked him what San Antonio was like. He told her honestly. Big enough to get lost in. Small enough that everyone eventually knew your business. She asked if that was good or bad. He said it depended on what your business was. She almost smiled. It changed her face considerably. Jesse looked at the road ahead. They made camp at dusk on the first day, 26 miles north of Laredo. Jesse built a fire small enough to not be visible from a distance. Elena noticed that. "You think they're still following," she said. Not a question. "I think it's better to assume they are," Jesse said. "Until we know they're not." She nodded, sat close to the fire without being told. They ate dried beef and hardtack that Jesse carried. She didn't complain about it. He appreciated that more than he would have said. That night, watching the fire, Elena said something that Jesse would think about for a long time afterward. "My father used to say that the land doesn't belong to anyone who hasn't carried water across it." Jesse looked at the fire. "Your father sounds like a man worth knowing," he said. She didn't answer right away. When she did, her voice was even. "He was," she said, past tense. Jesse understood. He didn't ask. On the second day, they stopped at a small settlement to water the horses and buy provisions. 12 buildings. A general store. A livery. The kind of place that existed because the road needed something between 2 larger places. Jesse was inside the store when the storekeeper said something that stopped him. Not to Jesse specifically. To the room in general, the way men in general stores talked in those days. Vargas's men came through here yesterday, the man said. Looking for a girl. Jesse paid for the provisions without changing his expression. Walked outside. He didn't stop walking when he reached Elena. Mount up, he said quietly. We're taking the East Trail. She mounted without asking why. That was the moment Jesse Cole understood something about Elena Reyes. She trusted him, not blindly, not without reason, but she had made a decision when she said those 3 words in Laredo, and she wasn't taking it back just because the road had gotten harder. They rode east for 2 hours before turning north again, adding distance to the journey, but removing them from the main road. As they rode, Jesse was doing math he hadn't done before. Vargas's men had crossed the border. They had come north on the main road fast enough to get ahead of 2 riders moving at a normal pace, which meant they knew where Elena was going, San Antonio. The cousin. They weren't following the trail, they were following the destination. Jesse thought about that for a long time as the horse moved under him. A man who knew where you were going didn't need to chase you. He just needed to be there when you arrived. Elena, he said, I need to ask you something. She looked at him. Your cousin in San Antonio. Does she know you're coming? A pause that told Jesse the answer before she gave it. I sent a letter, she said, 2 weeks ago, before I crossed. A letter, posted from a town south of the border. A letter that anyone with enough money and enough contacts could have intercepted or tracked. Jesse said nothing for a mile. Then, we're not going straight to San Antonio. Elena looked at him. Where are we going? Somewhere they won't expect, Jesse said. And then we figure out what we're actually walking into. The 3rd night, they camped without a fire. Elena didn't complain. She had stopped complaining about things she understood the reason for. In the dark, she told him more about Vargas. Not everything, but more. He had wanted the ranch for 2 years before he took it. Had made offers. Had been refused. Her father was not a man who sold land that had been in his family for 3 generations. Then the accident started. Fences cut, cattle missing, a well filled with rocks. Then her father himself, found at the edge of the property 3 months ago. They said he'd fallen from his horse. Her father had been riding horses since before he could walk. Jesse was quiet for a long time. You don't have to say anything, Elena said. I know what happened. I know what Vargas is. I just need to get to my cousin. After that, I can figure out the rest. What's the rest? Jesse asked. She looked at him. What I'm going to do about it, she said. Jesse Cole had been minding his own business for 11 years. He was starting to understand that some situations didn't allow for that. On the 4th morning, Jesse stopped on a rise and used his field glass. 2 riders on the main road to the south, moving north, moving at the pace of men who weren't following a trail. They were moving at the pace of men going to a place they already knew. He lowered the glass, looked at Elena. 2 of them, he said. South Road, moving fast. She absorbed this without falling apart. How far ahead of them are we? Half a day, maybe more. And San Antonio? 2 days. She did the math. Jesse watched her do it. Then we need to move faster, she said. He nodded. They moved faster. They reached San Antonio on the afternoon of the 5th day. Came in from the east, not the south. Jesse's idea. They stopped at the edge of town, watched the streets for 10 minutes before entering. Nothing unusual. Regular life of a city going about its business. Where does your cousin live? Jesse asked. Elena gave him the address. Jesse knew the street. A good neighborhood, by San Antonio standards of the time. The cousin had done well, apparently. They rode to the address carefully. Jesse kept his eyes on the street behind them. Nothing following. The house was a modest but solid adobe on a quiet street. Flower pots on the windowsills, curtains in the windows, signs of a life that had settled and taken root. Elena looked at it for a long moment. Jessie let her look. She dismounted and knocked. The door opened. A woman in her 40s. The resemblance to Elena was clear enough that Jessie didn't need an introduction. What passed between them in the doorway was not something Jessie could name. It was the specific relief of family. Finding family across a distance that had felt impossible. The cousin looked at Jessie over Elena's shoulder, evaluating him the way women on the frontier evaluated men who showed up with people they cared about. "This is Jesse Cole," Elena said. "He brought me here." The cousin nodded once, stepped aside to let him in. Inside, over coffee that Jessie drank 3 cups of, the cousin told them what she'd been told. 2 men had come to her door 2 days ago, looking for Elena, asking questions she hadn't answered because she hadn't known the answers. They'd left. But they'd been seen on the street twice since. Jesse set down his cup. They had arrived before the riders, but the riders knew the address. They were waiting. They were in the hall. While the cousin prepared food, Jesse and Elena stood close enough to speak without being heard. "They know where you are," Jesse said. "They'll come back." "I know," she said. "Then you know this isn't finished." "It won't be finished until Vargas decides it is," she said, "or until someone makes him." Jesse looked at her. 11 years of minding his own business. A letter to deliver. Payment for the ride. A woman who said 3 words and changed the geometry of his entire trip. He stood at the window and looked at the street. Quiet afternoon. Children playing at the far end. A dog sleeping in a doorway. Normal life. The kind of normal that didn't know it was sitting on top of something that hadn't been resolved yet. He turned back to Elena. "Tell me everything you know about Vargas," he said. She studied him for a moment. "Why?" Jesse thought about how to answer that. The honest answer was that he wasn't entirely sure. "Because you said, 'Take me with you,'" he said. "And I said, 'All right.' That means I'm still in this until it's settled." Elena looked at him for a long moment. The same measuring look she'd given him in the side street in Laredo. Then she told him everything. Not the version she'd been careful with on the road. The whole thing. All of it. Jesse listened without interrupting. When she was finished, he was quiet for a full minute. "Vargas has paper on the land?" he said. "Paper he bought," Elena said. "From a judge in Piedras Negras." "Is the judge still the judge?" "He is," she said. "But he has a superior. In Saltillo." Jesse nodded slowly. He understood systems. Not the complicated political ones, but the basic human ones. Every corrupt system had a point where it was more expensive to maintain the corruption than to abandon it. You just had to find that point. "I know a man in San Antonio," he said. "A lawyer. He's handled land disputes across the border before. Will he help?" "He'll listen," Jesse said. "That's where you start." 3 weeks later, the situation had changed. Not completely. Not in the way stories sometimes pretend, but enough. The lawyer Jesse knew had contacts in Saltillo. The judge in Piedras Negras, it turned out, had been making arrangements like the one he'd made for Vargas with troubling regularity. When the right people in the right places began asking questions, the paper Vargas held became less solid than it had looked. The ranch would not come back to Elena. The lawyer was honest about that. Too much time. Too much damage. The land had already been transferred twice, but Vargas's ability to operate on both sides of the border had been significantly complicated. The men he'd sent after Elena were recalled. The judge in Piedras Negras lost his position. On the street outside the lawyer's office, Elena and Jesse stood in the afternoon sun. Neither of them spoke for a moment. "It's not everything," she said finally. No, Jesse said. It's not. But it's something. Because of you, she said. Because you didn't stop, Jesse said. I just helped you keep going. Down the street, her cousin appeared, waving from a doorway, life continuing. Jesse looked at Elena, at the street, at the horse he'd tied at the post outside the lawyer's office. Elena read the situation. You're going north, she said. Work to do, he said. Ranch in Abilene needs riders for the fall. She nodded once. 5 days of Texas between them, 400 miles, one word that had started all of it. She held out her hand. Jesse shook it. He mounted, looked at her once, then he rode north. Elena watched until she couldn't see him anymore. Then she walked to where her cousin was waiting. Jesse Cole rode north for 3 days before the story settled in him. Not the events of it, those he'd already filed away, the meaning of it. He'd ridden into Laredo to deliver a letter. He'd ridden out of Laredo with a woman he'd known for 4 hours and a situation he hadn't asked for. He'd added 2 days to his journey, spent money he'd needed for other things. Ridden off the main road through brush country and slept without a fire for 2 nights. And he'd do it again. That wasn't heroism. That was just what you did when someone said, "Take me with you," and you had the means to help and the choice to make. The frontier had a way of putting that choice in front of people regularly. Most of the time it happened without warning. A dry creek bed, a side street in a border town, a woman moving through a crowd with the contained urgency of someone trying not to run. You either stopped or you didn't. You either said all right or you didn't. Jesse Cole had spent 11 years building a life out of not getting involved. It had kept him alive and uncomplicated. But uncomplicated wasn't the same as right, and alive wasn't the same as living. He reached the top of a rise on the 3rd day and stopped his horse. The land stretched north as far as he could see. Somewhere behind him, a woman was starting over in a city she'd never been to before, building something from what was left after everything else had been taken. He'd helped with that. Not the building, just the getting there. Sometimes that's the whole job. You don't fix the thing, you just help the person who can fix it get where they need to go, and you say all right when they need you to say it. And you mean it. Every week on this channel, another story from the frontier, where the choices people made told you everything about who they were. This story is a work of fiction, inspired by the spirit of the Texas border country. If it stayed with you, subscribe. Tell us in the comments, would you have said all right? The next story is already on your screen.